Hi, my name is Brent Valadares, and I will be doing a review on Chapter 8 of Walt's Real Estate Principles. I will first give a quick, brief overview of the entire chapter, talk about 3 key concepts that I learned from the chapter, and finally a summary of my thoughts on the chapter. Now, Chapter 8 first introduces the transaction coordinator, who is responsible for assisting agents and brokers in the processing of a real estate transaction, such as preparing and submitting important documentation related to the transaction, handling the deposit, communicating with all parties, and then following up on said documents. These professionals can be hired from the earliest stages of a transaction for an additional fee, or limited to starting when they first receive a purchase agreement. The chapter later covers the topic of escrow, the purpose of an escrow, which is to make sure the terms in the transaction are accomplished, how it's created or started, the process that an escrow holder goes through after opening escrow, the requirements that make an escrow valid, the types of individuals or entities that have the ability to act as escrow holder, ways to terminate escrow, and finally how escrow is closed. The chapter then goes on to discuss the Structural Pest Control Certification Report, which is not required by California law, but most lenders do require it. It also talks about fire and title insurance, as well as the different types of title insurance policies, and then finishes off the chapter with the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, RESPA for short, and the mentioning of the California Escrow Association. Now, the first key concept that I learned from the chapter was the difference in California customs between North and South for escrow services and title insurance. For example, in Southern California, the escrow instructions are signed by both the buyer and the seller right after the opening of escrow, while in the North, escrow instructions are given to the escrow officer right before the closing of escrow. Another example is that in the South, escrow service fees are split 50-50 between buyer and seller, while in the North, the service fees are paid for by the buyer. There are some exceptions, such as how in both parts the buyers pay for any coverage above the California land title insurance policy, doesn't matter Southern California or Northern California. Now, the second key concept that I learned was that all escrow companies use 30 days as a base month for proration, which is the process of dividing expenses and income among buyer and seller when escrow closes. A great example given by the book is that if an escrow closes on the 10th day of the month, all prepaid rents for that month are split 90/30th, 3/10 of the rent left for the seller, and 21/30th, 7/10 for the buyer to reimburse. If the rent is $2,000, the seller's portion is $600, and the buyer's portion is $1,400. The third key concept that I learned from the chapter was about RESPA, which is the law for the sale of transfer for 1 to 4 residential units that require specific procedures and forms for settlements involving home loans from a financial institution and federally instituted deposits. This law states that the closing costs of a transaction must be made known to a borrower or buyer on or before the closing of escrow. The buyer may request that it be provided 1 business day before the settlement date. This makes it clear for buyers to know of the exact amount needed to go through with the closing of escrow so that there's no surprises. All in all, this was an interesting chapter, similar to the rest, that has made me a step closer to understanding the principles of real estate. These are things that I hope to see myself working with in the future of real estate, and are concepts that I most likely will encounter when I first try to sell my first property. And I know by that time, I will be much more adept in these principles and basics. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.